For as the light of the morning cometh out of the east, and shineth even unto the west, and covereth the whole earth, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Therefore sanctify yourselves, that your minds become single to God, and the days will come that you shall see him. For he will unveil his face unto you, and it shall be in his own time, and in his own way, and according to his own will. This is Unveiling Jesus Christ.
Hello and welcome to this podcast on Unveiling Jesus Christ. I'm John Cassanet, and my last podcast gave an overview of the Second Woe, also known as Armageddon. Today we'll begin digging into the details of the Second Woe, beginning with two verses in Revelation 9, verses 13 and 14. For the nutshell version of this podcast, you can check out section 118 in my book. So let's begin with Revelation 9:13, which states, quote, "And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar which is before God." Close quote. The sixth angel is the sixth trumpet angel that will sound during the seventh seal to begin the second woe. Remember, in Revelation 8, verses 1 and 2, we were told that, quote, "When he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. And I saw the seven angels which stood before God, and to them were given seven trumpets." Close quote. That's why I refer to these angels as trumpet angels, and we're now up to the sixth trumpet angel, which corresponds with the second woe, also known as the 7-year physical battle of Armageddon. When the sixth trumpet angel sounds, John hears a voice from four horns of the golden altar. This verse refers to the golden altar of incense located before God, and before God refers to the holy place located in the temple or tabernacle before the veil that separates the holy place from the Holy of Holies. The altar was constructed with one horn on each of the four corners. The same design exists for both the brazen altar that was located in the courtyard and the golden altar that's located or was located in the holy place. John refers to the same altar that he saw in Revelation 8:3. And for more on that, you can check out my podcast from November 19, 2024, where we saw that from this altar in heaven, Christ will offer the prayers and make intercession for the saints during a half hour of silence when the seventh seal opens. Now, from the same golden altar, Christ begins to answer the prayers of martyred saints with the judgments of the second woe. Richard Draper makes the connection between the golden altar as a place of the intercessory prayers of the saints and the source of judgments on the wicked, saying, quote, "That the voice comes from the horns of the altar suggests that in some way the second woe is connected with or a result of the prayers of the saints, for the voice that commands the infliction comes from the very place, the altar, on which their prayers were offered." Close quote. Brother Draper is pointing out that the prayers of the saints ascended from the intercessory altar, and that the judgments on the wicked descend from the same intercessory altar. It is the singular voice of Christ through four horns that represent universality or completeness. Charles Ellicott points out that the voice is heard as a single voice out of the midst of the horns of the altar. It is very doubtful whether the word "for" ought to be retained. The voice is represented as rising from the surface of the altar, at the corners of which were the four projections known as horns. Close quote. Some of the Greek manuscripts speak of one voice, perhaps emphatic, meaning the voice, but it comes through the four horns. It's kind of like dual mono. If you know anything about audio recording and so on and so forth, when you have dual mono, you can hear in both ears, if you're wearing headphones, a podcast like this, except that in the case of the voice coming through the four horns, it would be a double dual mono, four horns for four ears. So why do we hear Christ's voice from four horns and not the altar itself? The horns are, of course, a symbol of power. The imagery comes from the horns of a bull or a wild ox, which are sometimes seen as a weapon of attack, thus a symbol of aggressive power and strength. The four horns, one on each corner of this altar, represent universal power. So let's go back momentarily to talk about what happens on the Day of Atonement in connection with these altars in the temple. The sacrificial blood of the animal was sprinkled on the four horns of the brazen altar to reconcile the Israelites to God, as described in Exodus chapter 30, verse 10. The horns on this altar were also a sanctuary or a safe haven for malefactors and criminals who held the horns securely after the discovery of their crimes. This goes back to the time of Solomon, when Joab, who was David's nephew, sought sanctuary after Solomon ordered him to be killed for not supporting Solomon as the future king. Now, the horns did not provide a sanctuary in cases of premeditated murder. The law of Moses prescribed death as the punishment for that crime. So these ancient practices are a type for the judgments of death to be poured out on the wicked during the second woe of Armageddon. Instead of reconciliation or sanctuary from the horns of the brazen altar, what we get are the four horns of the golden altar that will bring death to the third part of men. Thomas Coke explains the irony of the imagery, saying, quote, "At the sounding of this sixth trumpet, a voice proceeded from the four horns of the golden altar, for the scene was still in the temple, ordering the angel of the sixth trumpet to loose the four angels, and etc. And they were loosed accordingly. Such a voice proceeding from the four horns of the golden altar is a strong indication of the divine displeasure and plainly intimates that the sins of men must have been very great when the altar, which was their sanctuary and protection, called aloud for vengeance." Close quote. The horns of the altar and the corresponding New Testament symbol of the cross cannot save people that are ripe in iniquity. They are sons of perdition who knowingly sin, as a premeditated murderer knowingly kills. The Book of Mormon Reference Companions explains this, saying, quote, "The Book of Mormon teaches that apostasy occurs in at least two ways: knowingly and openly rebelling. Indeed, those who sin knowingly in open rebellion are especially condemned, and are frequently the most bitter of apostates, far more so than those whose apostasy stems from backsliding parents or inherited false traditions." Close quote. Joseph Seiss, a non-member of the LDS Church, connects the destruction from the four horns with Cain, who murdered Abel, saying, quote, "The call from the altar also reflects the character of a particular apostasy for which this invitation is sent. When there is a voice invocative of judgment, the locality of it expresses where the sin has been, which is to be avenged. The voice that went up against Cain for the murder of his brother cried from the ground which had received Abel's blood. The voice of woe to him that buildeth a town with blood, and establisheth a city by iniquity, comes from the stones and beams of the houses of that town and city. And when a call for retribution comes from the altar, it is because of some great crimes against that altar and what connects with it." Close quote. Now, what I find interesting about this quote by Joseph Seiss is his noteworthy connection between Cain and the altar, because keep in mind, Cain became perdition. He is the head of the class of persons targeted for death during the Second Woe. Now, Joseph Seiss probably had no idea of the connection of his comments between the altar and sons of perdition that are targeted during the Second Woe. Let's now turn our attention from the sixth angel sounding his trumpet after hearing the voice of Christ to see what happens once that sixth angel sounds his trumpet. In Revelation 9:14, we learn that the voice of Christ was, quote, saying to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates, close quote. Thus we see that Christ directs the sixth angel to loose four angels. Now, we previously encountered four destroying angels in Revelation 7:1. These were four destroying angels held at bay during the period of the sixth seal, which is the time in which we now live, until the process of sealing the 144,000 was complete. Now, for more details on this, you can check out my podcast from August 11 of 2024. And in a few minutes, I'll talk about whether they are the same four angels in Revelation 7:1 and the four angels we now encounter here in Revelation chapter 9. But let me focus for a moment on their being loosed suddenly from the Euphrates River. I've mentioned before how Armageddon will begin at a precise moment in time. This verse is indicative of that conclusion because, as Albert Barnes observes, in the imagery of this verse, the meaning is that the effect of his blowing the trumpet would be the same as if angels that had been bound should suddenly be loosed and suffered to go forth over the earth. That is, some event would occur that would be properly symbolized by such an act. That is, they seemed to be bound. There was something which held them, and the forces under them in check until they were thus commanded to go forth, close quote. Again, that's indicative of a sudden point in time when the second woe begins and Armageddon commences. Now, once again, the angels are four in number to symbolize the worldwide scope of their destructive mission. Philip Schaff makes this now obvious connection, saying, quote, it is true that four angels are here mentioned, but this arises from the fact that four is the number of the world, the whole of which is to be affected by the plague. Close quote. Hopefully this will dispel any preconceived notions you may have about where Armageddon will occur. Yes, there is a place north and east of Jerusalem called the Valley of Megiddo, or Har Megiddo, which means the Mount of Megiddo, located in the plain of Esdraelon. But this is far more than just a regional or Middle Eastern conflict. The four angels represent worldwide scope. Even now you can see how easily Middle East affairs, that is wars and conflicts, tend to drag in large world powers like Russia, China, the United States, Britain, etc. They must all have their part in the conversation, as Lady Catherine de Bourgh would say from Pride and Prejudice. Certainly, the Middle East should be considered as the center of the conflict we call Armageddon. But make no mistake, this is a worldwide conflict. That is, it will be geographically complete in its scope, as stated by Richard Draper, saying, quote, four of the angels follow the mighty angel's devastations with additional plagues. Again, the number four is symbolic of geographical totality, close quote. So now let's turn back to the question of whether the four angels in Revelation 9:12 are the same four angels we encountered in Revelation chapter 7, verse 1. There is certainly some parallel imagery that connects them. For example, in Revelation 7, The first four destroying angels that we met were told not to unleash their destructive powers until the 144,000 servants had been sealed in their foreheads. So it makes perfect sense that with the sealings accomplished by the seventh seal, both the sealing of exaltation worthy people, which are the 144,000 servants, and even more critically, the sealing of the sons of perdition to hell and damnation during the first woe, it's now time for their destructive forces to be unleashed. So that which was held at bay in Revelation 7 is now loosed in Revelation 9. So it seems like it's really nice and it's tidy, it's ordered, it's easily understood imagery, right? Well, not so fast. The four angels from the great river Euphrates do not appear to be the four restoration / destroying angels from Revelation 7:1. Why? Because in Revelation 7:1, it seems highly likely that they were four actual angels associated with the restoration of the gospel, including Peter, James, and John, the three apostles, and then John the Baptist, the same that baptized the Savior, as explained in my podcast from July 30 of 2024. Whereas, and by contrast, the four destroying angels in Revelation 9:14 represent more of an abstract and symbolic idea, as I shall presently explain. My view, coincidentally, is shared by most commentators who talk about the book of Revelation, including Henry Alford, who said this back in the late 1800s, quote, "First, we must not yield to the temptation, so attractive at first sight, of identifying these four angels with the four angels standing on the four corners of the earth and holding the four winds in chapter Revelation 7:1. For the mission of these angels is totally distinct from theirs, as the locality is also. There is not a syllable of winds here, nor any hurting of the earth, sea, or trees." Close quote. Walter Scott reaches the same conclusion, noting their symbolic differences, when he said that the four restraining angels, that is in Revelation 7:1-3, must not be confounded with the four bound angels at the river Euphrates in Revelation 9:14 and 15. The former are stationed at the extremities of the earth, the latter in the circumscribed region of the Euphrates. Besides, not only are the times and circumstances different, but the action in each case is exactly opposite. The four angels of chapter 7 restrain the forces of evil, whereas those of chapter 9 let loose the human and satanic instruments of vengeance. Close quote. Note that Walter Scott refers to these four angels in Revelation 9 as controlling evil forces, which does tend to distinguish them from the four restoration angels in Revelation 7. However, the four from the Euphrates do carry out the purposes of God, as made clear by Richard Draper, who said that these angels were prepared for one purpose: to kill. They are indeed destroying angels. Of interest is that even though the acting agent is known to be the sixth angel, the verb of their loosening is passive. They were loosed. The form suggests that the four angels, even in their rebellion, are agents of the divine will. Close quote. Now, it's important to note that all evil, unembodied, and disembodied spirit sons of perdition were released on earth with great power during the first woe. And here, in the second woe, these same spirits are now loosed with power to destroy, to extend themselves in destructive ways to the four corners of the earth. The point of the imagery in Revelation 9:14-15 is the sudden release of the worldwide scope of their destructive powers and the source from whence those powers are released. The four destroying angels of the second woe come from the Euphrates River, so we need to focus a little bit on that imagery. The image of the great river Euphrates is highly symbolic, as explained first by Marvin Vincent, who said, quote, "The Euphrates was known as the great river, the flood. It was the boundary line of Israel on the northeast. It thus formed the natural defense of the chosen people against the armies of Assyria. The melting of the mountain snows causes an annual flood beginning in March and increasing until May. These floods became an emblem of the judgments inflicted by God upon Israel by means of Babylon and Assyria. To the prophets, the Euphrates was the symbol of all that was disastrous in the divine judgments." Close quote. Thus, the Euphrates River serves as a type for the worldwide judgments that arise with the four angels who are loosed from the Euphrates River. It's an important point of the imagery. Joseph Seiss makes the same point from a historical perspective, saying, quote, "A particular locality is named as the place of their detention at the great rivers Euphrates. It was in this locality that the powers of evil made their first attempts against the human race. It was in this locality that the first murder was committed. It was in this region that the great apostasies, both before and after the flood, had their centers. It was in this region that Israel's most oppressive enemies resided, and that the Jews were compelled to drag out the long and weary years of their great captivity. It was in this region that the great oppressive world power took their commencement. It is the region where all this world's beginnings were made, where man first saw the light, first sinned, fell from his first estate, was banished from paradise, and introduced all earth's miseries, where Satan first alighted upon our planet, won his first triumphs, and first set his foul agencies against man in operation." The Euphrates River in this context alludes to Babylon. It is a wicked city at odds with, or the enemy of, God's covenant people, a symbol of God's tool that brings disastrous judgments. For example, the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of the first temple, and captivity of the Jews in 587 BC. It's a worldly city built near and over the Euphrates River anciently. The Cyclopedia of Biblical, Theological, and Ecclesiastical Literature gives a graphic and compelling description, saying, "Babylon, as the center of a great kingdom, was the seat of boundless luxury, and its inhabitants were notorious for their addiction to self-indulgence and effeminacy. Q. Curtius asserts that nothing could be more corrupt than its morals, nothing more fitted to excite and allure to immoderate pleasures. The rites of hospitality were polluted by the grossest and most shameless lusts. Once in her life, according to Herodotus, every native female was obliged to visit the temple of Mylitta, the Babylonian Astarte or Venus, and there receive the embraces of the first stranger who threw a piece of money into her lap, an abominable custom. Babylon even stands, therefore, in the New Testament as the type of the most shameless profligacy and idolatry." Close quote. Commentators have correctly noted that Babylon is symbolically the capital of the Antichrist. As I have mentioned, the Euphrates River was the historical border between Israel and her wicked enemies to the east. Walter Scott gives a very good explanation of the Euphrates as a historical border, saying that the great river Euphrates, its entire length is about 1,780 miles, and it is by far the longest and most important river of Western Asia. The rivers Nile and Euphrates are prophetically designated as the limits of the Promised Land. For a brief season, David and Solomon extended the royal authority to the Euphrates. The Euphrates was the natural boundary separating the nations of the east from Palestine. Its broad stream flowed between Israel and her powerful enemy, Assyria. The Euphrates was also the limit of the Roman conquest in that part of the world. Close quote. Anciently, the Euphrates River as a border was also a natural defense. In those days, it would have been Assyria, and in many movies, rivers present an obstacle or a defense of some kind. So, for example, you have movies like A Bridge Too Far or The Bridge Over the River Kwai. Consider images from the war between Russia and Ukraine. If you look them up on Google, you can see these blown up bridges and these offensive and defensive boundaries being tied to various rivers in Ukraine. The same is true of the Euphrates River that was a source of natural defense anciently, and with Armageddon, it now becomes a source of an offensive enemy. Due to its historicity, the Euphrates in Revelation 9:14 is seen by some commentators as a description of ancient battles, but clearly we're talking here about an event that lies in our future. The Euphrates River is mentioned again in Revelation 16:12, which states, quote, "And the sixth angel," and just to be clear, this is not the sixth trumpet angel. This is one of the vial plague angels later on in Revelation 16:12. So let me put that out there and then begin my quote of this verse again. "And the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, so that the way of the kings of the east might be prepared." Close quote. So there's a lot here to unpack, and we'll get there eventually. For now, just understand that in Revelation 16:12, the Euphrates River is symbolically connected to the future third woe, where we encounter the spiritual battle of Armageddon, when the evil spirits of spiritual Babylon will be removed from the earth. So the dual reference to the Euphrates in the second woe, related to physical Armageddon in Revelation 9:14, is why some scholars say that the same battle is described again in Revelation 16:12 during the spiritual battle of Armageddon of the third woe. But these are very distinct stages of the closing conflicts leading to the second coming. To be precise and to be clear, Revelation 9:14 occurs in the second woe and is describing physical Armageddon using the Euphrates River as a symbol. In Revelation 16:12, we're talking about the third woe, which is spiritual Armageddon, where once again the Euphrates River is using in a symbolic way with a slightly different slant to it. In both cases, the image is used to express many of the same meanings that we gather from the traditions and history of ancient and modern Babylon. Since both the second woe and the third woe still lie in our future, both contain allusions to spiritual Babylon of our day and the destruction of her wicked citizens, those who are mortal during the physical battle of the second woe, and those who are spirits during the third woe, which is spiritual Armageddon. Now, the scriptures have many allusions to modern and spiritual Babylon of our day. For example, Doctrine and Covenants, section 116 states, quote, "They seek not the Lord to establish his righteousness, but every man walketh in his own way, and after the image of his own God, whose image is in the likeness of the world, and whose substance is that of an idol, which waxeth old, and shall perish in Babylon, even Babylon the Great, which shall fall." Close quote. So let me briefly summarize the symbolism in Revelation 9:14. We have four angels loosed from the great river Euphrates. They represent all unembodied and disembodied spirit sons of perdition loosed again from the bottomless pit to exercise their deadly power during the second woe. Now, why do I say again? That's because that's what Forrest Gump always says. But during the first woe, these disembodied and unembodied spirit sons of perdition were loosed with power to torment mankind on the earth like locusts with scorpion stingers, and they were preparing for battle, as I discuss in my podcast on January 12th, 2025. But now, here we are in the second woe. The image changes to war horses, which I summarized in my last podcast, and I will describe that in more detail in a future podcast. But these war horses, these evil spirits, will be given power to influence mortal armies that will be combatants in the Battle of Armageddon, and they will destroy the third part of mortal men. Bruce R. McConkie explains generally how this occurs, saying, quote, acting in conformity with laws which exist, evil spirits have power to tempt men, to entice them to work wickedness, and to induce them to do those things which are carnal, sensual, and devilish. Revelations come to men just as easily from devils as they do from holy sources. By rebellion and wickedness, men may commune with evil spirits, whereas by obedience and righteousness, they might have seen angels and had the communion of the Holy Spirit. All these things are governed by law. Close quote. Thus, we have the same evil spirits from the first woe who have much more power during the second woe than the first. So during the first woe, they can only use their influence to torment mankind, but not kill them. But now in the second woe, as explained by Richard Draper, the evil spirits from the bottomless pit have power to kill, saying, quote, these angels, kept in check up to this point, now unleash their destructive fury, for to slay the third part of men. Though the King James Version has them coming from the Euphrates, the northernmost part of Israel based on prophetic statements, the JST or Joseph Smith translation has them coming from the pit of the abyss. Thus, their genesis is the same as that of the locusts that Satan frees, and therefore they too will follow his will. Close quote. So let's do a quickie recap here just so that I make sure everybody's with us. During the first woe, evil spirits are released from the bottomless pit with power to torment but not kill mankind. That's Revelation 9 verses 1 through 11. During the second woe, the same evil spirits from the bottomless pit get loosed with more power to now kill mankind by their influence. These spirits reach the climax of their power during the second woe, right up to the point that they have the power to cause the death through the instrumentalities that they control, that is, mortals, the two witnesses who will be martyred and die in Jerusalem, as I described in my last podcast. During the third woe, these same evil spirits will lose their power completely during spiritual Armageddon. That is, the disembodied sons of perdition will be cast alive into the lake of fire in Revelation 19:20, and the unembodied sons of perdition will be bound in the bottomless pit in Revelation 20, 1 through 3. So that's the nutshell of what I'm talking about in terms of the symbolism that we're encountering here in Revelation 9, verses 14 and 15, and the four angels who are loosed from the Euphrates. Now, I passed over one issue rather quickly with a quote by Richard Draper. He mentioned that the Joseph Smith translation changes the great river Euphrates in Revelation 9:14 to the bottomless pit. That verse says this specifically, quote, saying to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, loose the four angels which are bound in the bottomless pit, close quote. This important change confirms the identities of the four angels as evil spirits because they don't come from the geographical location of the Euphrates River today on earth. They actually come from the pit, the abyss, the bottomless pit, what we've described as I have gone through my discussion of the first woe. That is the domain of both unembodied and disembodied spirit sons of perdition that I described in my podcast on January 29th as to the unembodied and January 31st, 2025 as to the disembodied. So with Joseph Smith's inspired change, it removes any dispute about the identity of the four angels in Revelation 9:14. They come from the bottomless pit as evil spirits, and they are four in number to represent the whole of all such evil spirits, including all the unembodied spirit sons of perdition, all the disembodied spirit sons of perdition. The four are representative of the group as a whole. This is comparable to the four beasts that we encountered in Revelation 4, who we were told represented all creation. Now, if this kind of sounds a little Greek to you, so the four who? Then go back to my podcast from May 12th of 2024, where I talk about the four beasts that John saw in his vision of celestial paradise, and the description given to us from Doctrine and Covenants section 77 is that they were representative of four classes of creation. So too also with these four evil spirits that are loose from the Euphrates River. They are a symbol representative of an entire class of both unembodied and disembodied spirit sons of perdition who get loosed with great power to cause death among mortal people when the second woe opens with the sounding of the sixth trumpet plague. So, by way of conclusion to this podcast, with the start of the second woe, we see that the evil spirits are on earth with great power and given sufficient power that they can control mortal people who will be in charge of and command the mortal armies that will destroy the third part of men during physical battle. This will be a time when the wicked are going to slay the wicked, as we will talk about in a future podcast. It isn't spirits killing mortal men, it's mortal men who are wicked killing other mortal men who are wicked. Bruce R. McConkie spoke of them saying, quote, "Four angels of the devil, demons from the depths of hell, are given free rein to lead the armies of men in destroying a third part of the population of the earth." Close quote. Again, evil spirits do not have power to kill, only to influence other mortal people to do their killing. So how did they get to the point where they have such a vast amount of control over mortal people to bring about the physical death of so many? It begins in large measure during the spiritual darkness of the first woe. Remember, it's during the first woe that the world will become ripe in wickedness and evil. And when that ripeness is full, that is, it reaches the high noon of evil, then the four angels of the second woe will be suddenly loosed. It is this suddenness that we're going to talk about in my next podcast, as discussed in Revelation 9:15, which states that Armageddon will begin at a specific hour, day, month, and year. So get ready for the start of Armageddon in my next podcast. And until then, thanks for watching, listening, subscribing, and sharing, and to Jen and Kristen for all their help. I will see you next time on Unveiling Jesus Christ.